Thoughts on Parshat Shoftim. Shoftim opens with an instruction that sounds almost bureaucratic. Appoint judges and officers in all your gates. We'll come back to that, but now the verse that follows is instructive and important. Everyone remembers, Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof. Justice, justice shall you pursue. Not justice as a state you arrive at and then rest. Justice, rather, as something you keep chasing actively because it keeps slipping just out of reach. I've been in Indonesia for the past week and a half, visiting Jewish communities scattered across an archipelago most of you have never had the reason to think about. I visited Jakarta, Timika and Sentaning in Papua, and now Ambon in the Spice Islands. I've been writing about it as I go, and if you're interested, email me. And some of you have been reading along, but I want to bring a piece of it here in this Devar because I've been thinking about these words from Shoftim for many days. In Sentaning, we spent an entire evening with a small, remarkable Jewish community that lives largely in stilt houses built over a lake, in villages that often have no running water. Some of their families used to make a living selling fish and betel nuts at a local indigenous market, but lately there hasn't been enough demand even for that, so a few of them have started going up into the mountains instead, panning for gold. It's hard, uncertain work that rarely pays off. To make matters worse, a few years ago, flooding and mudslides devastated the Sentaning village and displaced many of our community members and their neighbors. There were a number of deaths, but thankfully none from our community. Yet, despite their own displacement, the Sentaning Jewish community, small and poor as it is, was among the first to help. They also received donations from the Jewish communities across Indonesia and even from Adelaide in Australia and Tokyo to help in this important effort. I'm not sharing these details to make you feel sorry for anyone. Instead, I'm sharing it because of what Tzedek, Tzedek, Tirdof demands. The doubled word isn't just Hebrew emphasis. Instead, our ancient rabbis read it as a demand. Pursue justice whether it benefits you or costs you, and pursue it not only on your behalf, but also on behalf of everyone. They don't need to look like you, think like you, or even worship like you, or even live close to you. We are all created b'tselem Elohim in the divine image, and the demand for tzedek is for all humanity and indeed for all creation. A community with almost nothing was still the first to show up for their neighbors at a time of disaster. That tzedek, tzedek tirdof are people who live and actualize the words every day. Now I want to refer back to that beginning of Shoftim, which I want to talk about now. The Parsha doesn't set up justice as an emergency response, something you reach for only when there's a disaster. Instead, it opens with judges and officers stationed in our gates at the entryways of our towns. They are doing the work of justice every day, day after day, long before any crisis arrives. Justice in Shoftim is supposed to be built into the architecture of daily life, not saved up for dramatic moments. A community that shows up for its neighbors during a flood is usually a community that already had been showing up for them every ordinary day long before the flood came. They work at transformation towards justice every day, not just when facing catastrophe. The same Sentaning community, interestingly, not so long ago, went through its own quiet transformation towards justice, towards tzedek. Leadership passed from a small group of men to 2 women and many others, and the result has been remarkable. The community is now more egalitarian, more participatory, and genuinely stronger for it. Shoftim itself is a parsha obsessed with the question of who gets to lead and how power should be limited, checked, or shared out. It spends real time on the rules constraining kings, specifically so that no one person's power goes unchecked. That's really important. Watching a community 8,000 miles from Saratoga work that principle out in practice, without ever citing the verse was one of the most Jewish things I've ever seen. I did not expect to find some of the clearest illustrations of this week's Parshat Shoftim in a conference room in Sentaning among people who own almost nothing and live further from a synagogue building than any of us ever will. But Tzedek Tzedek Tirdov was never written for people with only for people with comfortable margins to spare. It was written for exactly the kind of situation where pursuing justice costs you something real. And so here's my ask as we go through the next weeks for all of us, this Shabbat and next Shabbat as well. Somewhere in your own life in the weeks to come, there may be a piece of justice that would cost you something to pursue. Perhaps it will be a hard conversation or an even harder act of generosity. Maybe it will require you to stand up for someone who cannot stand up for themselves. In these cases, don't just think this would be good. Remember and stand up and act. Shoftim doesn't let us treat justice as something we've already arrived at. It's Tzedek Tzedek Tirdov. We must pursue it again and again, just like that small indigenous community of Sentaning in a lake in Papua, as they pursued it when they had so little, but they had the courage to act. Shabbat Shalom.